From At Home Tuition. In this video, we are going to see few examples on applications of various properties of integers. Our first question is, for an integer a, what is -1 times a equal to? So they have given an integer a and we have to find what is -1 times a equal to. So for an integer a, so any integer means integer a may be a positive integer or a may be a negative integer. So first let us check if a is a positive integer. So we know that any positive integer when multiplied with a negative integer gives negative integer, or also we can say that negative integer multiplied odd number of times gives negative integer, because we are taking a as a positive integer and we are multiplying it with -1. So -1 is taken only odd number of times, so the result will be a negative integer. So we are getting negative a, or negative integer multiplied with positive integer will gives you the negative integer, so it will be negative a. So a multiplied with -1 gives negative a, or we can write it as -1 multiplied with a gives negative a. Now let's consider a as a negative integer. So if a is a negative integer, we know that when any negative integer multiplied with another negative integer gives positive integer, or negative integer multiplied even number of times gives us the positive integer. See here, negative integer multiplied with again negative integer, so it gives us positive integer. Or here negative a times -1. So here we have two negative integers, so it is even number of negative integers. So if even number of negative integers are multiplied, we will get positive integer. So negative a times 1 is positive a, or -1 into negative a is positive a. So thus for any integer a, -1 times a is negative a when a is positive, and -1 times negative a equal to positive a when the integer a is negative. So when multiplied with -1 gives the opposite sign. When a multiplied with -1 gives the opposite sign. If it is positive, then the answer will be a negative integer. So if the a is a negative integer, then the result will be a positive integer. Next question is, determine the integer whose product with -1. So you are multiplying the given numbers with -1 and we want to find the product. So now on multiplying, first number is -22. On multiplying -22 with -1. So -22 times -1. So here we have two negative integers, that is even number of negative integers or two negative integers. So our result should be positive. So -22 times -1 is positive 22. So thus multiplication of integer -22 with -1 gives the additive inverse of that integer. That is, additive inverse of that -22 is positive 22. Next number is 37. So now we want to multiply 37 with -1. So 37 into -1. So here one negative integer and one positive integer. That is odd number of negative integers. So if you multiply odd number of negative integers, the result should be a negative integer. So 37 times -1 is -37. So thus the multiplication of an integer 37 with -1 gives the additive inverse of that integer. So 37 is the integer and additive inverse of 37 is -37. So additive inverse is nothing but if you add two numbers, the answer should be 0. Next question is, number is C. Okay, so it is 0 is given. So multiplying 0 with -1, we will get 0 into -1 is 0. We know that the product of negative integer and 0 gives only 0, because any integer multiplied with 0 results in the value of 0. Next question is, starting from -1 into 5, write various products showing some pattern to show -1 into -1 is equal to +1. So now our given pattern starts with -1 into 5. So -1 into 5 is -5. We know that Negative integer multiplied with positive integer results in a negative integer. So next pattern, we are reducing 1, okay, because we are multiplying it with negative 1. So we are reducing 1 with the integer. So after 5 it will be 4. So negative 1 into 4 will be negative 4. So that is negative 5. We are adding 1 with negative 5, okay. So it will give us the result of negative 4. Next, here we are reducing 1 with a positive integer. It's nothing but we are adding 1 to the negative integer. So next step, it's negative 1 into 3 is negative 3. That is, we are adding 1 to the previous result. So multiplication of negative 1 is nothing but adding 1 to the previous result. So negative 1 into 3 is negative 3, which is nothing but negative 4 plus 1. Next is negative 1 into 2, it's negative 2. It's nothing but negative 3 plus 1. Next is negative 1 into 1, that is negative 1, which is nothing but negative 2 plus 1. But we need negative 1 into negative 1, that is positive 1. So let's move for further steps. So negative 1 into 0 is 0. We know that any number multiplied with 0, the result is 0. So negative 1, again we are adding 1, so we will get 0. Next is negative 1. So after 0, if you subtract 1, we will get negative 1. So negative 1 into negative 1, it's positive 1. So negative is multiplied 2 times, that is even number of times. Or if you multiply 2 negative integers, we get positive result. So it is positive 1. So we are adding 1 to 0. It is 0 plus 1. So it's clear that the product of two integers with same sign will always be positive. This means the product of two positive numbers or two negative numbers will always be positive. While the product of positive number and a negative number, the integers with different sign will always be negative. Question is, replace the blank with an integer to make it a true statement. So it's negative 3 times dash is 27. So we want to find the answer for the blank. So we know that 3 times 9 is 27. Okay, so but we want to decide whether it is positive 9 or negative 9. So here the negative 3 multiplicand is a negative integer and the product 27 is a positive integer. So we also know that negative number multiplied even number of times or two negative integers multiplied gives the positive integer as the result. So the multiplier should also be a negative integer. So here negative 3, then the multiplier negative 9 should also be a negative integer. So negative 3 into negative 9 is 27. So the blank should be negative 9. So the next question is 5 into dash is negative 35. Okay, so now 5 is a positive integer and the blank we have to find out. The product should be a negative integer. So here 5 multiplicand is positive integer and the product is negative integer. So we know that negative number multiplied odd number of times gives negative integer, or one negative integer and one positive integer gives the result as negative integer. So here 5 is positive, so the integer 7 should be negative such that the product will be a negative integer. So 5 into the blank is negative 37, which is equal to negative 35. Next question is dash into negative 8 equal to negative 56. So we know that 7 into 8 is 56. So the multiplier is a negative integer and the product is a negative integer, negative 56. So product is a negative integer. So we know that negative integer multiplied odd number of times gives the negative integer. So already we have one negative integer. So the other number should be a positive integer. So that will give the result as negative integer. So it is positive 7 into negative 8 is negative 56. Next question is dash into negative 12 is positive 132. We know that 11 into 12 is 132. But here the 12 is negative. That is multiplier. So we want the result as positive integer. So we know that negative integer multiplied even number of times. So here we have odd number of times. So the multiplicand should also be a negative integer. So negative 11 into negative 12 is positive 132. Hope you have understood how to find whether it is positive integer or negative integer based on the given question. Thank you for watching this video.